We're off.
Right. Go on with it. I'm sorry to waiting at Chicago traffic kept me from having time. It took me 2.5 hours to get here from Milwaukee. Very honored by the opportunity to speak to you, and I'm going to talk very quickly about some of what we've been doing trying to design green skyscrapers. I used to look dark green skyscrapers because there are two things. First is that truly green skyscrapers are sort of exist at the moment, in my opinion, because the theory, the technology, and the budget doesn't exist to enable this to happen. And so when we talk about green skyscrapers, we basically talk about light green skyscrapers and dark green skyscrapers. Now, I'd like to show this slide, which is a series of plates in somebody's kitchen. And that's essentially what most of us as architects, engineers, and designers are doing. Most of the skyscrapers that we design are nothing more than a series of plates, homogeneous plates, similar plates, stacked one on top of the other, in this way. And so what we have with the skyscraper, this instant compartmentation. The spaces in the skyscraper are segmented, fragmented, and piled on each other. And so to get from one space to another space, you walk to this lobby, you press a button, and this little metal cabinet arrives, door opens, you walk in, you press a button, and then you arrive in another space. It's almost an inhuman way of, a natural way of going from one space to another space. Now, the same architect who designs these sort of skyscrapers, instant compartments, when you ask him to design a low-rise or a medium-rise building, he was designing like something on the right-hand side, which is, the bedrooms in between, programs in between, and that's pretty lot of connectivity and organic relations between the spaces. So this poses the question: why can't we design buildings, our skyscrapers, in the same way we design low-rise and medium-rise buildings? And the answer is yes, of course we can, but we don't. And so my biggest challenge to all of you today who are skyscraper designers is that why don't you design your skyscrapers the same way you design your low-rise and medium-rise buildings, and make them much more humane, much more diverse, rather than a stack of trays, repeated agnostic from the lower floors up to the upper floors. Yes, I know some of you would have some evenings in between, some little cutouts here and there, but essentially every floor is almost the same. And so one of the early thoughts that I had about skyscraper design is that why don't we redesign a skyscraper and look at it as if we're designing a medium-rise building or a high-rise building. In this way, one of the early drawings I did to show that why can't we put parts in the building, major parts, small parts, little squares, pocket parts, like diverse circulation systems and so forth. And so one of the ideas I had several years ago is to look at skyscraper design no longer as designing a building, but as vertical design. Now let's say if you have a site of about 20,000 square foot, and your plot ratio wants to 12, then the permissible building area is about 240,000 square feet. Now this 240,000 square feet, if it is on a 10,000 square foot site, with a setback from the edge boundary, we're talking about a 24-story building. Now, if you see the skyscraper design as vertical design, then it suddenly becomes clear that the actual built-up space of this 240,000 square foot was almost equal to 6 acres. Right? Well, if you were to design something 6 acres, you wouldn't regard it as architecture and architecture anymore. It is urban design. It is placemaking. It is linkages. It is vistas. It is everything that is to do with urban design, but now in the sky. And so the idea that I had is that what happens if we take urban design and we flip it upwards? So all the aspects of urban design, like placemaking in the sky. And then what is placemaking in the sky? What is mixed programs in the sky? Because you don't have a homogeneous program with a 6-acre site. You would have shopping centers here, you would have retail shops, possibly have a local park. You would have different programs which would make the whole development much more integrated. What is landscaping in the sky means. So just landscaping the ground and landscaping locations. What happens if you have landscaping which is continuously up the building? Upper urban linkages, urban linkages in the sky, bigger ground relationships in the sky, vistas and so forth. And so this suddenly opened a Pandora's box for me, and I said, here you are, there's a whole set of ideas that you could use to apply to design a skyscraper. Now if you take placemaking in the sky, then the whole idea is that whatever there's on the ground plane, let's flip it vertically. Whatever we find pleasure on the ground, we flip it vertically and use that as a basis for skyscraper design. So this is one of the projects we just designed in Abu Dhabi, where we said, look, if we create places that you courtyards and plazas that you have in the ground plane in the city, if we flip out vertically, this is what you get. You would have a building, a complex where you have a continuous set of spaces, which is linked, which is integrated into the built form, and that every floor is different, and yet within this you have the feeling of the diversity of the city in the upper parts of the building. So this is the scheme itself. You can see that the agents are built into the building, into the tower block, and that this is differentiated by the different sun shading systems in the building. And then in the upper parts of the building you have plazas, you have little mini squares, you have gardens, you have water features, you would have roof gardens, and you would have atrium spaces which looks down maybe several or 5 floors, not just at the ground plane, not just in the middle of the building, but weave this way up the top of the building. So I thought this is one way of making the skyscraper much more unique and much more pleasant space to be in. So at the same time, why should that be only one single use when we have the skyscraper? Why can't we have mixed programs in the sky? And so with this scheme, what we try to do is to say that, look, we not have complex political programs. Rather than have everything at the ground plane, could we not have an art gallery in the middle of the building? Could we not have the local retail shop or the news agent in the upper parts of the building? Why can't we have schools in the upper parts of the building? And then why should we only have one single park or one single open space? Or why should we have a series of sky courts? But rather than have a hierarchy of green spaces, we have a large park, which could be vertically integrated. It could be a series of smaller parks. We have pocket parks, little squares, little open spaces as well. So in this way, we make the skyscraper much more humane. And then finally, why can't we have a much more diverse circulation system? Instead of having a single bank of elevators, albeit some of this may be sort of, we have a sort of transfer point in between. Why don't we have a main circulation system that serves the entire building, and then the secondary that serves maybe 10 or 12 floors, the tertiary that serves maybe 3 or 4 floors, and maybe even sort of little ramps and staircases that makes it look much more complex, which makes it much more similar to the conditions found in the ground, because in the ground plane, to move from one place to another place, you don't have just one single route, one single access, but you have a number of multiple ways to move up the building. So with these, we start to develop this scheme for this master plan, where we have a series of towers, and each of the towers have a very complex set of programs, relationships, and multiple circulation systems within this overall higher site. And then from there, a much more relaxed and conversational approach to organizing the buildings. So in this way, we're creating a city in the sky rather than just a repeated building with some floor plates. These are some steps to start the building, and this is the aggregate form for this project. Then I started to think, well, if we were to landscape or build a high-rise, there's much more than just having switched to sky courts. We should make it continuous. And so one of my early work was to look at different ways of integrating greenery into buildings. And if you like, these are a series of diagrams. The first diagram shows all the greenery in one location, as you would have, that's in Central Park in New York. Or second would be a much more spotty relationship, as you have maybe the George in London, where you have a series of squares, Bedford Square, Houston Square, Russell Square, so forth, but interconnected and linked in some sort of conversational way. And finally, you could have a series of ecological corridors and fingers that really intertwine, integrate the organic form with the inorganic form. And in terms of high-rise, it would be a sort of spiraling system, because by being spiraling interconnected with what is the ground plane and the ecologist point of view, enables species interaction within the whole building, enables species migration, enables species, encourages larger biodiversity, and also engenders a much more larger sharing of resources within habitat, and therefore a much more stable system. In my early work, we looked into putting, initially having this body relationship. And this is one of the early things we did with the vegetation outside the building. And when this was completed, it was referred to one of the hairiest building in the world. But this image is actually quite important. It's an important image for me because I believe that the green aesthetic will be a much more fuzzy aesthetic, will be much more hairy aesthetic, and that this is that the green building in the future will not look like the modernist building that you see today. There's the building which is a 30-plus story building. This is a floor-plate building. And in those early years, I did buildings which fairly deep floor plates, which is not particularly good for daylight, because you can't daylight can't reach in across the building. But in this experimental scheme, I had a series of courtyards around the sides of the building, and around the courtyards are planted boxes, which are sprinkled with that watering system. And that's the building in the context of the city. And on that side of the building itself, I'm showing you the north facade. Often does not get direct daylight, direct sunlight, and so we put it at the wall express facade. The next idea we have of integrating vegetative buildings is to have a series of step planters combined with a series with trellises. So in this way, the planters create this way, the foliage works its way up the building. Then the planters would have a sprinkler system, which feeds fertilizers and water into the plant process. Like a living organism. So this is one of the buildings we did for IBM, and you can see the plant is starting from the ground, working its way up the building, goes across the floor, and works its way around the corner of the building. What we did in this scheme was to try and investigate the existing ecology of the site and recreate it. And so we looked at the vegetation within the 500-meter locality of the site. We try and bring it up the top of the building. And so in this way, for this scheme, we really sort of had, instead of a series of step planters, this time a series of grand planters that works its way up the top. And so the rotated floor plan became of interest to me. I thought, if you can rotate it, then part of the overhang but also sunshade and protect the floor below. And so it also occurred to me that actually other species, other living organisms in our biosphere, like ants, do build skyscrapers as well. And so on the right-hand side, you see a skyscraper designed by ants. And ants can actually build skyscrapers many, many thousand times their own height, whereas we as human beings probably build skyscrapers to 200-300 times their own height. So in effect, ants are much better engineers and architects than we are. So in this project, what we had is a ramp that starts on the ground plane. And this is a multi-use cultural building, and so this justifies the ramp that's continuous, and alongside the ramp we would have planters, and so the planters would follow the circulation ramp and work its way continuously all the way up the building. So in this way we have what you see on the bottom right-hand side, a nexus of vegetation that integrates with the built form. Here's an image of the building, and you can see the vegetation looking as well. The intention was that if opportunity provides the occasion enables it, and then we should try and wrap across the adjoining buildings and try to integrate with the gardens and adjoining buildings as well.
Sorry, can you go back another 5 minutes?
So, some other examples. That in designing low energy building, you're looking at different ways of creating conditions of comfort, and that to me there are 5 ways of creating low energy building: passive mode, mixed mode, full mode, reductive mode, composite mode. And that strategically designed low energy building, we should optimize all capacity strategies before we go to other strategies. Because in this way, we start with low energy building in the first instance, and anything else we add to it simply enhances its performance. And that if you look at this set of tables, a full mode building would use anything between 200 to maybe 340 kilowatts per square meter per annum, whereas a mixed mode would be around 80 to about 120, and less than less than 100 kilowatts per square meter per annum. Some examples of thermal strategies would be this. These are basic architecture principles, which is start with proper shaping the building, proper configuring the building, and so forth. And many people have written about this. And so this is an example of the second building we did at IBM, where we used the core as a buffer between inside and outside. We compared 3 different situations: side core, central core, and the north core. And you can see that proper shaping the building by looking at the orientation. On the left-hand side, it has the lowest OTTV value, which is 43.3 watts per square meter. Whereas if you don't shape it properly, you end up with a high-energy building, and anything else you add on top of it to reduce the energy building makes it total nonsense of designing an energy building. And so here's a multi-story tower, multi-story library that we designed in Singapore. It's about 120 meters high. Like everything else in Singapore is a high-rise. This high-rise, and with this building, this received Singapore government green mark, platinum award, which is equivalent to be platinum. And at the ground plane, we simulated the conditions. We put it in a wind tunnel to check the conditions of the ground plane. And that within the building itself, we have a series of eco cells that brings vegetation and daylight and natural ventilation and provides opportunities for providing a living machine at the bottom of the building. I still got a lot more slides to show, but I realized that very much time. So I should really end this. Thank you very much.